The old radio crackled to life in the middle of the night. Jake Morrison rolled over in his cot and squinted at the green glow of the emergency receiver. 3 years of silence, and now it was screaming with urgent signals from across the galaxy. He pulled on his boots and walked across the cold metal floor of the command center. Outside the reinforced windows, 2 moons cast pale light across the rocky surface of Kepler 44 to be. This world had been home for 15 years now. Ever since the Terran Colonial Authority had packed up and left them behind, the message was in Galactic Standard, repeating every 30 seconds. Jake had learned enough of the language during his military days to understand the basics. It was a distress call. A big one. Lisa Rodriguez appeared at his shoulder, her dark hair messy from sleep. She had been his second in command since the early days when they were still hoping for rescue ships that never came. "What does it say?" she asked, rubbing her eyes. Jake listened to another cycle of the transmission. His face grew serious as he picked out keywords. Galactic Council. Emergency. Military assistance required. Vorthok swarm. "Someone's in trouble," he said. "Big trouble." Lisa moved to the communications console and began working the controls. Her fingers danced over switches and dials that had been repaired and replaced so many times that the original labels were long gone. She had kept their equipment working through sheer determination and spare parts. Salvaged from crashed ships, the signal cleared up as she adjusted the receivers. Now, they could hear the fear and the alien voices making the broadcast. The Galactic Council was begging for help from anyone who could fight. "The Vorthok swarm has consumed the Altarian Empire," the translated voice said. 17 star systems have gone dark. The Kethfer Republic has fallen. The Zephyrian Order has retreated to emergency positions. All available military forces are requested to respond immediately. Jake stared at the radio. The Altarians had energy weapons that could crack planets. The Kethfer could reshape living tissue with their minds. The Zephyrians were so old and powerful that most species treated them like gods. If they were all running scared, what chance did anyone else have? "Sir," Lisa's voice brought him back. "To the present? Should I wake the others?" Jake nodded. Within 20 minutes, the command center was full of people in various stages of dress. Some had grabbed weapons out of habit. Others clutched cups of the bitter coffee that grew in there. Underground Gardens, Danny Kim arrived with his medical kit, even though no one was hurt. The former Army medic had learned that emergency calls usually meant someone would need patching up before the night was over. His hair was gray now, but his hands were still steady. Amy Foster stumbled in wearing her pilot's jacket over pajamas. She could fly anything with engines, from the big mining haulers to the small scout ships they used for hunting pirates. Her eyes were alert despite the early hour. Pete Williams came last, carrying his rifle like always. The ex-Marine had trained every adult in the colony to fight. Even the children knew how to handle a weapon and find cover when the alarm sounded. "What's the situation, sir?" Pete asked. Jake played the transmission again. The room grew quiet as people listened to the desperate plea for help. When it finished, nobody spoke for a long moment. Maria Santos was the first to break the silence. "The council never helped us when we called," she said. Her voice was bitter with old memories. When the corporate wars started, when the pirates came, when the plague hit Sector 7. Where were they then? Everyone remembered those dark days. Jake had sent transmission after transmission, begging for evacuation ships, medical supplies, anything. The responses had been polite but useless. The colony was too far from the core worlds to matter. The corporate sponsors had written them off as a loss. "That was different," said Amy. "This is about innocent people, billions of them." "And what about us?" Maria shot back. "We were innocent too. We're just trying to make a living on this rock when they abandoned us." Jake held up his hand for quiet. He understood both sides. They had every right to be angry. The galaxy had forgotten about them until it needed something. But he also knew what it felt like to be helpless while something terrible happened. "How many ships do we have that can make the jump?" he asked Lisa. She pulled up a screen showing their small fleet. 47 vessels, various sizes, the big mining ships, the cargo haulers, the scout fighters. Most of them are in decent shape. Weapons? Mining lasers on the big ships. There's a military surplus we picked up from that pirate raid last year. The fighters have pulse cannons. Paused. It's not much compared to what the council forces usually carry. Jake looked around the room at the faces of his people. They were hard faces, weathered by years of struggle. These weren't the polished soldiers of the core worlds. They were farmers, mechanics, and miners who had learned to fight because the universe had given them no choice, but they were also some of the toughest people in the galaxy. They had survived corporate wars, pirate raids, equipment failures, and natural disasters. They had built a community from nothing and defended it against everything that tried to destroy it. "The kids," said Danny quietly. "We can't take the children into a war zone. The children will be safer here than anywhere else if those Vorthok." "Things keep spreading," Jake replied. "Besides, who's going to protect them if we don't stop this now?" He thought about the next generation of humans growing up on Kepler 44b. They were stronger than their parents, more adaptable. They had learned to fix anything, fight anything, and survive anything. The harsh world had made them into something new. "We don't know anything about these Vorthok," Pete pointed out. "Could be walking into a slaughter." "Could be," Jake agreed. "But we know how to fight things that want to kill us. We've been doing it for 15 years. Amy Foster stood up. "I'm in," she said simply. "My fighters can scout ahead, give you intel on what we're facing." Pete nodded slowly. "My people are ready. We've been training for something like this without knowing it." One by one, the others voiced their agreement. Danny would organize medical facilities. Maria would handle logistics. Lisa would keep the ships running. Jake felt a familiar weight settle on his shoulders. It was the same feeling he had gotten the day the evacuation. Ships left without them. The day he realized that no one was coming to save them, and they would have to save themselves. "All right then," he said. "We prep the ships and head out in 6 hours. Anyone who wants to stay behind can stay. No one's being forced into this." The meeting broke up. Lisa lingered behind. "Jake," she said softly, "you know this is probably suicide." Looked out the window at the 2 moons hanging in the star-filled sky. Somewhere out there, people were dying while their governments ran away or hid. Somewhere out there, machine intelligence was consuming everything in its path. "Maybe," he said, "but somebody has to try. Not us, then who?" Lisa smiled grimly. "Since when has that stopped us before?" Within hours, the colony was buzzing with activity. Ships were fueled and armed. Supplies were loaded. Families said their goodbyes, not knowing if they would see each other again. Jake stood on the launch platform as the first ships lifted off. 47 vessels of various shapes and sizes, held together by determination and recycled parts. They weren't much to look at, but they were crewed by people who had learned that the only way to survive was to never give up. The radio was still broadcasting the Council's desperate plea as the human fleet jumped toward the war zone. No help had come from the galaxy's great powers, but help was coming anyway. The human fleet moved through space like a pack of wounded animals. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Defiant, watching the other ships through the main viewer. They were an ugly sight by military standards. Patched holes, mismatched weapons, and engine trails that showed their age. The Defiant had been a deep space mining ship, before the humans turned it into their flagship. Its hull was scarred from years of asteroid impacts and emergency repairs. The bridge still smelled like machine oil and recycled air, but it was home, and it was theirs. Lisa Rodriguez worked at the engineering station, her hands moving over controls that barely resembled their original design. Every system on the ship had been modified, repaired, or completely rebuilt over the years. She knew each piece of equipment like an old friend. "Jump drive is holding steady," she reported. "We should reach the Helix Nebula in 4 hours." Jake nodded. The Helix Nebula was on the edge of the war zone. They were going to find survivors or get intelligence about the enemy. That was the place to start. Danny Kim moved between workstations, checking on the crew. The old medic had turned part of the cargo bay into a field hospital. He expected casualties, and experience had taught him to be ready for anything. "How are the other ships holding up?" Jake asked. Amy Foster's voice crackled over the come from her fighter wing. "Everyone's keeping formation, sir. The cargo haulers are slow, but they're steady. My scouts report no problems. Fighter pilots were flying ships that were older than some of the crew members, but they had been rebuilt so many times that they were practically new. Each pilot knew their craft inside and out. They had to, because spare parts were hard to find and mistakes were usually fatal. Pete Williams was aboard the converted freighter Guardian, training volunteers for boarding actions. The ship's cargo holds had been turned into mock-up facilities, where humans practiced fighting in zero gravity and unfamiliar environments. Remember, Pete's voice came over the training "Come, we don't know what these Vorthok look like or how they fight. Stay flexible, watch each other's backs, and adapt to whatever you see." The volunteers were a mixed group. Some were former military, like Pete, but most were civilians who had learned to fight out of necessity. Miners who had battled cave-ins, farmers who had fought off predators, mechanics who had fixed systems while under enemy fire. Maria Santos coordinated supply distribution from her command ship, the Provider. She had turned logistics into an art, formed during the lean years on Kepler 4-4-B. Every bullet, every ration pack, every spare part was accounted for and distributed where it was needed most. "We've got enough supplies for 2 weeks of heavy fighting," she reported to Jake. "After that, we'll need to find what we need or make it ourselves." Jake wasn't surprised. They had always lived on the edge of disaster. The difference now was that they were bringing that experience to bear on a galactic scale. The first contact came sooner than expected. Amy. Foster's voice cut through the routine chatter on the CUM. Unknown contacts bearing 27 Mark IV. Large metallic signatures moving toward the monastery ship. Jake moved to the tactical display. The sensors showed massive alien vessels attacking a much smaller craft. The monastery ship was one of the ancient Zephyrian vessels, its hull glowing with the psychic energy that powered their technology. "It's under attack," Lisa said unnecessarily. "Those must be the Vorthok." Jake studied the display. The enemy ships were huge, angular things that looked more like factories than warships. They were tearing the monastery ship apart with beams of energy that seemed to convert matter into something else. "All ships, battle stations," Jake ordered. "Fighter wings, prepare for attack run." Amy Foster's squadron moved ahead of the main fleet, their small ships diving toward the enemy like hawks attacking eagles. The Vorthok vessels detected them and began to turn, their weapons swiveling to track the new targets. "They're big," Amy reported, her voice tight with concentration. "And they're covered in weapons, but they're slow to react." Jake watched the tactical display as the human fighters engaged the enemy. The Vorthok ships were powerful, but they moved like they were following a program. Their responses were predictable, mechanical. "Target their weapon clusters," Jake ordered. "Don't try to fight them head-on. Hit and run, just like we did with the pirates." The humans had learned to fight against superior numbers and firepower during the corporate wars. They used speed and unpredictability to overcome enemies who were better equipped but less flexible. Amy's fighters struck like lightning, targeting weak points and vulnerable systems. When their weapons ran low, they used their mining lasers to cut through enemy armor. When those failed, they rammed damaged fighters into critical systems. The main fleet arrived as the first Vorthok ship began to break apart. Jake ordered the mining ships to target the enemy's engines, while the cargo haulers moved to rescue survivors from the monastery ship. "This is Captain Morrison of the human fleet." Jake broadcast on all frequencies. "Zephyrian vessel, we're here to help. Prepare for emergency evacuation." The response came in heavily accented Galactic standard. "Human fleet, this is Prior Kelthan of the Wandering Path. We ... tow. We did not expect aid from your species." Jake almost smiled. Nobody expected humans to do anything these days. That was starting to work in their favor. The battle was over in 30 minutes. 3 Vorthok ships destroyed, the monastery ship saved, and only minor damage to the human fleet. It was a good start, but Jake knew it was just a taste of what was coming. The rescued Zephyrians were unlike anything most humans had seen before. They were tall, pale beings with large eyes that seemed to see through everything they looked at. Their leader, Prior Kelthan, appeared on the Defiance Bridge like a living ghost. You fight with great fury, the prior said, studying Jake with those disturbing eyes. This is ... unexpected. We fight to win, Jake replied. Simply, everything else is just details. The prior's expression was unreadable. The Vorthok are not like your previous enemies. They adapt. They learn. They will be ready for you next time. Lisa looked up from her damage reports. Then will. Adapt to. We've been doing it for 15 years. Prior seemed surprised by this response. Most species fought with established tactics and standard equipment. They relied on superior technology or numbers to overwhelm their enemies. The idea of constantly changing and improving was foreign to them. We have information about Vorthok operations, the prior offered. Fleet movements, target priorities, conversion techniques. Perhaps we can assist each other. Jake nodded. We'll take any help we can get, but we're not stopping here. There are more people out there who need rescue. Over the next few days, the human fleet moved through the war zone like a surgical knife. They struck at Vorthok scouts and supply lines, rescued survivors from destroyed worlds, gathered intelligence about the enemy. Each battle taught them something new. The Vorthok were machines, but they were smart machines. They analyzed human tactics and began to counter them. The humans changed their tactics too. It's faster than the machines could adapt. Amy Foster developed new fighter formations for fighting. In asteroid fields, Pete Williams created boarding tactics for capturing Vorthok technology. Danny Kim learned to treat injuries from energy weapons that converted organic matter. The refugees began to accumulate. Altarian nobles who had lost their crystal cities, Kethfer scientists who had fled their laboratories, Spherian monks who had abandoned their temples. They all crowded into human cargo holds and makeshift shelters. "Why are you doing this?" asked Ambassador Vex, an Altarian diplomat who had lost everything. "Your species gains nothing from this war." Jake was in the cargo bay helping to distribute food to the refugees. Children of a dozen different species played together while their parents watched with hollow eyes. "We're doing it because somebody has to," Jake said. "And because we know what it's like to be abandoned." The ambassador looked confused. "But the Galactic Council will reward you. Credits, technology, territory. The Council will forget about us the moment this war is over," Jake replied. "Just like they forgot about us before. We're not doing this for rewards." Lisa appeared at his shoulder with a status report. "Sir, we've got word from the Outer Scouts. The main Vorthok fleet is moving toward the core worlds. They'll be in range of the inhabited systems within a week." Jake looked around the cargo bay at the refugees, at his crew, at the children who were learning to trust each other despite their differences. This was what the war was really about. Not territory or politics or glory, but the simple idea that some things were worth fighting for. "Signal the fleet," he ordered. "We're moving to intercept. Time to see what we're really made of." The ragged human fleet jumped toward the core worlds, carrying hope and desperation in equal measure. Behind them, the rescued refugees settled, in for a journey that would change everything they thought they knew about the species that had been written off as unimportant. The galaxy was about to learn. What happened when humans had nothing left to lose? The reports reached the Galactic Council bunker on Sanctuary Prime like lightning strikes. Admiral Chen Shao stared at the tactical displays with growing disbelief. 17 Vorthok formations had been engaged by unknown human forces in the past 72 hours. All 17 had been destroyed or forced to retreat. "This is impossible," muttered General Korax, the Council's chief military advisor. His blue skin had turned pale as he read the combat reports. These humans are using cargo ships and mining equipment against Vorthok dreadnoughts. Intelligence Chief Kara Okafor pulled up video feeds from the battle zones. The recordings showed human ships fighting with a savagery that made her scales crawl. They used damaged vessels as weapons, turned civilian craft into troop carriers, and employed tactics that violated every rule of civilized warfare. "Look at this," she said, pointing to one screen. Human captain named Steve Parker deliberately crashed his cargo hauler into a Vorthok command ship. The explosion destroyed 3 enemy vessels. Donald Zhao studied the footage with the eye of a professional soldier. The humans fought like they had nothing to lose, which made them incredibly dangerous. They took risks that would have horrified any trained military officer. Where did they come from? He asked. We have no records of major human military installations in that sector.
Us.
They appear to be colonial survivors, Okafor replied.
Oh.
Our files show a failed mining colony on Kepler 44 to be that lost corporate support 15 years ago.
Oh.
Apparently, they never left. The Admiral felt a chill. 15 years of abandonment would do things to people. It would make them hard, desperate, and completely unpredictable. Exactly the kind of enemy the Vorthok artificial intelligence couldn't handle. Meanwhile, the human fleet had split into smaller groups that moved through space like hunting packs. Each group operated independently, but stayed in contact through encrypted channels. They struck at supply convoys, communication arrays, and industrial facilities with surgical precision. Commander Lisa Rodriguez had turned the Defiant into a mobile command center that coordinated rescue operations across 6 star systems. Her engineering teams worked around the clock, converting cargo bays into medical facilities and refugee quarters. The ship's corridors were crowded with survivors from a dozen different species. Altarian children played games with human youngsters, while their parents shared stories of homeworlds that no longer existed. Kethver engineers worked alongside human mechanics, learning each other's techniques. We're running out of space, Danny Kim reported to Jake as they walked through the converted cargo areas, and medical supplies are getting low. We'll make do, Jake replied, watching a group of mixed-species children sharing a meal. We always have. The refugees were beginning to see something they hadn't expected. These humans who had been abandoned by the galaxy showed more compassion and determination than any of the major powers. They took in everyone, regardless of species or status. Ambassador Vex approached Jake with a puzzled expression. The Altarian diplomat had been observing human behavior for days, trying to understand their motivation. Your people confuse me, Vex said. You risk your lives for strangers, share your resources with those who can give you nothing in return. This makes no economic sense. Jake paused beside a viewport, showing the stars. Maybe that's the point. Not everything has to make economic sense, but why? What do you gain? Sleep, Jake said simply. We sleep better knowing we did the right thing. The fighting continued across multiple systems. Captain Tony Garcia led a squadron of converted freighters in the asteroid belts, developing new tactics for fighting Vorthok ships in dense debris fields. His pilots learned to use the rocks as weapons, pushing asteroids into enemy formations. With mining charges, it's all about timing, Garcia explained to his pilots over the comm. The Vorthok calculate trajectories based on standard physics. They don't expect rocks to suddenly change course. His ships would hide behind asteroids, plant charges, and wait for enemy patrols. When the Vorthok ships moved into position, the humans would detonate the charges and send house-sized rocks flying at incredible speeds. The tactic worked because it was completely insane. No trained military force would think to turn asteroid mining into a weapon system. But the humans weren't trained military. They were survivors who had learned to use whatever tools were available. Major Kate Sullivan was working behind enemy lines, training mixed-species resistance groups to fight the Vorthok on occupied worlds. The former Army Ranger had parachuted onto 3 different planets with small teams of volunteers. The key is mobility, she explained to a group of Zephyrian and Kethver civilians who had chosen to stay and fight. The Vorthok expect you to stand and fight. Instead, you hit them and disappear. Her resistance cells struck at Vorthok processing facilities, communication centers, and supply depots. They used improvised explosives, captured weapons, and knowledge of local terrain to cause maximum damage. The Vorthok began to adapt their tactics, as they always did. But they found that fighting humans was like fighting a force of nature. Every time they countered one human strategy, the humans invented 2 more. Amy Foster discovered this during a routine patrol near the Binary Stars system. Her fighter squadron encountered a Vorthok formation that had been modified to counter human attack patterns. They've upgraded their point defense systems, she reported to Jake. And their reaction time is faster. They're learning. But Amy was learning too. She split her squadron into even smaller groups, using hit-and-run tactics that kept the enemy guessing. When conventional weapons failed, her pilots used their ship's mining lasers to cut through enemy hull plating. "If they want to learn," Amy said over the comm as she dodged enemy fire, "let's give them something new to think about." The human fleet continued to grow as they rescued more survivors. Ships designed for mining and cargo hauling were converted into hospitals, workshops, and living spaces. The humans shared everything they had with the refugees, even when it meant going without. Pete Williams established training centers aboard the larger ships, teaching combat techniques to anyone willing to learn. Former Altarian palace guards trained alongside Kethver scientists and Zephyrian monks, all learning to fight an enemy that converted living beings into mechanical components. "The Vorthok aren't just trying to kill you," Pete explained to a mixed group of trainees. "They want to turn you into more of them. That means they have to get close. We use that against them." The training was brutal but effective. Refugees, who had never held weapons, learned to fight with tools, improvised explosives, and hand-to-hand combat techniques. They learned to work as teams, regardless of their species' differences. Back on Sanctuary Prime, Admiral Zhao received another impossible report. A human strike force had somehow penetrated the Vorthok perimeter around the Centauri cluster and evacuated 3 million civilians from a processing facility. "How?" he demanded, staring at the tactical display. "How did they get past the entire Vorthok defense network?" According to survivors, Okafor replied, "They didn't fight their way in. They disguised their ships as debris and drifted past the sensors. Then they used mining charges to blast holes in the facility walls and evacuated everyone through the breaches." The Admiral shook his head. It was brilliant and insane at the same time. The humans were rewriting the rules of warfare with every engagement. "Sir," his aide interrupted, "we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet commander." Now Jake Morrison's face appeared on the main screen, looked tired but determined, standing on a bridge that showed obvious signs of battle damage. "This is Captain Morrison to Galactic Council Command," Jake said. "We've got intelligence on the main Vorthok fleet movement. They're heading for the core worlds, but they're not taking the direct route. They're planning something." Admiral Zhao leaned forward. "What kind of intelligence?" "We captured some of their communication equipment during our last raid. Our people are working on decrypting it, but what we've found so far isn't good. The Vorthok aren't just trying to conquer the core worlds. They're planning to convert the entire population into processing units." The bridge fell silent. Everyone knew what that meant. Billions of beings turned into mechanical slaves, their consciousness trapped inside Vorthok technology. "Long do we have?" Zhao asked. "Maybe a week," Jake replied. "I'll reach the outer defense perimeter in 6 days. After that, it's over. We're mobilizing all available forces," Zhao said. "Can your fleet join the defensive formation?" Jake's expression was grim. "Admiral, with respect, your defensive formation won't work. The Vorthok have already analyzed Council military doctrine. They know how you fight, and they've prepared counters for all your standard tactics." "Then what do you suggest?" "We fight them our way," Jake said. "It's no formations, no predetermined battle plans, no rules. We hit them with everything we've got and keep hitting them until they break." The Admiral felt a chill. What Jake was describing wasn't military strategy. It was barely controlled chaos. But it was also the only thing that had worked against the Vorthok so far. "Very well, Captain Morrison. You have operational freedom. Do whatever it takes to stop them." The space around Andromeda Junction had never seen a battle like this one. The Vorthok main fleet stretched across the darkness like a metal plague, thousands of ships moving in perfect formation toward the core worlds. Against them stood the human survivors. 47 battered vessels that looked like scrap metal compared to the mechanical perfection of their enemies. Jake Morrison gripped the arms of his command chair as the Defiant shuddered under enemy fire. Around him, his bridge crew worked with desperate efficiency. Lisa Rodriguez called out damage reports while coordinating fleet movements. Danny Kim treated wounded crew members between tactical updates. "All ships execute pattern Delta 7. Jake ordered into his communicator. The human fleet responded with movements that looked completely random to outside observers. Ships that should have been retreating charged straight into enemy formations. Damaged vessels that should have been seeking safety launched suicidal attacks on Vorthok command ships. But there was a deeper logic to the chaos. The humans had learned that the Vorthok artificial intelligence struggled with truly unpredictable behavior. The mechanical minds could calculate millions of possible outcomes, but they couldn't understand decisions that made no logical sense. Captain Amy Foster led her fighter squadron in what looked like a hopeless charge against a massive Vorthok. Control node. The enemy ship was the size of a city, covered in weapons that could vaporize her tiny fighters in seconds. This is for everyone who didn't make it home. Amy's voice crackled over the comm as she dove through the defensive fire. Her pilots followed her into the storm of energy. Beams and metal fragments. Half of them were destroyed in the first few seconds, but the survivors kept coming. They used their mining lasers to cut through enemy armor, then switched to conventional weapons when those ran out. When Amy's fighter took a direct hit that destroyed her main engines, she didn't try to escape. Instead, she used her remaining thruster fuel to ram straight into the control node's command center. The explosion lit up space like a small sun. The Vorthok control node broke apart, its destruction sending shockwaves through the enemy formation. Without central coordination, dozens of Vorthok ships began operating on basic programming instead of coordinated tactics. But the mechanical fleet adapted quickly. New command nodes came online, and the Vorthok began targeting human command ships directly. They had learned that disrupting human leadership might break their seemingly random attack patterns. That was when the galaxy discovered what human leadership really meant. The Defiance Bridge took a direct hit from a Vorthok energy beam. Emergency! Lights flickered as atmosphere vented through hull breaches. Jake felt blood running down his face from a head wound, but he kept giving orders. Lisa, can you restore main power? Working on it, she called back from the engineering station. Her console was sparking, but her hands never stopped moving across the controls. A second hit destroyed the ship's primary communications array. Jake could no longer coordinate the fleet directly, but he wasn't worried. His people knew what to do. Throughout the human fleet, individual ship captains began making their own decisions. They attacked with a coordination that seemed impossible without direct communication. It was as if they could read each other's minds. Captain Tony Garcia's mining ship Lost Hope had taken so much damage that it was barely holding together. His engines were dead, his weapons were offline, and his hull was cracked in a dozen places. A logical captain would have ordered evacuation. Instead, Garcia used his ship's momentum to drift toward a Vorthok factory ship. His crew worked frantically to rig the mining charges they carried as weapons. When the Lost Hope collided with the enemy vessel, the explosion destroyed both ships and damaged 3 others nearby. Steve Parker was facing a similar situation. Aboard his cargo hauler, New Dawn, Vorthok boarding pods had attached to his ship, and mechanical warriors were cutting through the hull. His crew was fighting them in the corridors with hand tools and improvised weapons. "They want to convert us," Parker announced over the ship's intercom. "Not today. Instead of fighting. Defensive battle." Parker ordered his people to the escape pods while he piloted the ship directly into the nearest Vorthok command vessel. The collision sent both ships spinning into an asteroid field, where they were crushed by rocks the size of buildings. Major Kate Sullivan was fighting a different kind of battle aboard the converted freighter Guardian. Her ship had been boarded by Vorthok conversion units that were trying to take control of the vessel's systems. "Fall back to Section C," Kate ordered her Marines as they fought the mechanical invaders, hand to hand in the narrow corridors. The Vorthok were stronger and better armored than humans, but they fought like machines. They followed predictable patterns and couldn't adapt to tactics that changed from moment to moment. Kate's people used everything they could find as weapons. Welding torches became flamethrowers. Industrial tools became clubs and spears. Foam was used to blind enemy sensors. When conventional tactics failed, the humans got creative. They vented atmosphere to freeze Vorthok joints, used magnetic fields to disrupt enemy electronics, and even employed the ship's waste recycling system to create toxic gas. The battle raged for 18 hours. Human ships were destroyed. Good. People died, but the survivors kept fighting. They fought for the aliens who had never helped them, for the children sleeping in refugee quarters. The simple idea that someone had to stand against the darkness. Pete Williams coordinated the defense of the medical ships from his position aboard the Provider. The hospital vessels were supposed to stay out of combat, but the Vorthok had targeted them specifically. They're trying to prevent us from treating the wounded, Pete realized. They want to force us to abandon our people, but the humans had learned long ago that they never left anyone behind. The medical ships fought back with whatever weapons they could improvise. Surgical lasers became cutting beams. Medical scanners were modified to disrupt Vorthok sensors. When the Provider's main engines were destroyed, Pete used the ship's emergency thrusters to ram it into a Vorthok processing vessel. The impact created a breach that allowed human boarding. Parties to rescue hundreds of prisoners who were being converted into mechanical components. Lisa Rodriguez was fighting her own battle in the Defiance engineering section. The ship had lost main power twice, but she kept restoring it through sheer determination and creative repair work. The fusion reactor is overloading, her assistant warned. Then we use the overload, Lisa replied, her hands flying over the controls. Channel all the excess energy to the forward arrays. The Defiance mining lasers suddenly blazed with power they were never designed to handle. The beams cut through a Vorthok heavy cruiser like it was made of paper, splitting the enemy ship in half. The overload burned out the laser arrays and left the Defiant defenseless. But Lisa was already working on the next impossible repair. Had kept their ships running for 15 years with spare parts and determination. She wasn't going to stop now. As the battle continued, something strange began to happen. The Vorthok fleet, which had seemed invincible just hours before, started to show signs of confusion. Their perfect formations became ragged. Their coordinated attacks turned into individual struggles. The humans were doing something the Vorthok had never encountered before. They were winning through pure, stubborn refusal to give up. Danny Kim worked frantically in the medical bay, treating wounds that would have killed anyone else. But these were people who had survived 15 years on a world that tried to kill them daily. They were tougher than they looked. "How bad is it, Doc?" asked a wounded pilot who had lost her left arm to Vorthok conversion beam. "You'll live," Danny replied, applying emergency medical foam to the wound, "and you'll fight again." The pilot smiled grimly. "Good, I've got some payback to deliver." Throughout the human fleet, similar scenes were playing out. Wounded crew members refused evacuation. Damaged ships kept fighting long after they should have been destroyed. It was as if the humans had decided that dying was acceptable, but surrender was not. As the twin suns of the Andromeda system began to rise over the primary world, the impossible became reality. The Vorthok main fleet, which had conquered half the galaxy, was breaking apart. Their command structure was disrupted. Their conversion ships were destroyed, and their perfect mechanical coordination had been shattered by humans who fought like forces of nature. Jake Morrison, blood streaming down his face from multiple wounds, watched the enemy fleet begin to retreat on the tactical display. "Sir," Lisa called from her damaged console, "long-range sensors are detecting Vorthok ships jumping out of the system. They're retreating." Jake felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Complete victory, not just tactical success or strategic advantage, but the total defeat of an enemy that had seemed unstoppable. The human fleet had lost 23 ships and hundreds of good people, but they had accomplished something the galaxy's greatest military powers couldn't do. They had stopped the Vorthok. "Send a message to all ships," Jake ordered. "The battle is won. Begin search and rescue operations for survivors." 3 days after the battle at Andromeda Junction, the surviving human ships limped into the Sanctuary Prime system. Admiral Chen Xiao watched them approach through the observation deck of the Council's Emergency Command Center. What he saw defied everything he thought he knew about military operations. Half the human fleet was gone. The ships that remained were held together by emergency patches, determination, and what looked like pure willpower. The Defiant's hull was so damaged that atmosphere leaked from dozens of breaches. Other vessels showed signs of jury-rigged repairs. That should have been impossible, but they were here. Against all odds, these survivors had traveled across half the galaxy, fought the most dangerous enemy in known space, and won. Prepare a full honors reception, Admiral Zhao ordered his staff. These people deserve everything we can give them. The first shuttle to dock carried Jake Morrison and his senior staff. Admiral Zhao was waiting for them personally, something that had never happened for visiting officers from minor colonies. Jake stepped off the shuttle, looking older than his years. His uniform was patched and stained with blood that might have been his own or someone else's. Behind him came Lisa Rodriguez, her engineering clothes still smudged with grease and coolant fluid. Danny Kim carried his medical kit even here, as if he expected casualties at any moment. Admiral Zhao said formally, "On behalf of the Galactic Council, I want to thank you for what you've accomplished." Jake looked around the pristine command center with its clean walls and undamaged equipment. Everything here was perfect, untouched by war or hardship. It felt strange after so many years of making do with broken things. "We did what anyone would do," Jake replied simply. "No," Admiral Zhao said quietly. "You did what no one else could do. The official ceremonies would come later. The council would offer treaties, membership, advanced technology, and permanent bases in the core worlds. Political leaders would make speeches about courage and sacrifice. Military experts would study human tactics for years to come, but the real recognition was happening in places the council members would never see. In the refugee camps that had been set up on Sanctuary Prime, alien children were teaching human kids games from their home worlds. Elderly Altarians shared traditional songs with young humans who listened with wide eyes. Kethber engineers worked side by side with human mechanics, each learning from the other. The barriers between species were breaking down in ways that formal treaties could never accomplish. These people had bled together, fought together, and survived together. They were no longer separate races, sharing space. They were family. Commander Lisa Rodriguez found herself in an unusual position. As the senior surviving officer of the human fleet, she was suddenly responsible for coordinating the care of thousands of refugees and the repair of their remaining ships. "Ma'am," her assistant reported, "the council is offering us full access to their shipyards and manufacturing facilities. They want to rebuild our fleet with the latest technology." Lisa looked out at their damaged ships floating in the repair docks. Each vessel told a story of survival, of people who had refused to give up when everything seemed hopeless. "Tell them, we appreciate the offer," she said, "but we'll repair our own ships. We know how they work, and we trust what we've built." The assistant looked confused, but their technology is far superior to ours. "Superior for them, maybe," Lisa replied, "but our ships have brought us this far. They've earned the right to keep going." Danny Kim was dealing with a different kind of problem. Council's medical facilities were state-of-the-art, far beyond anything he had worked with during the war, but the wounded humans refused to be separated from the alien refugees they had rescued. "Doc," said one of Amy Foster's former pilots, "can you make sure the Zephyrian kids get their medicine? They're scared and their parents are gone." Danny smiled. Even wounded and exhausted, his people were still taking care of others. It was what made them human. Pete Williams was training Council's security forces in anti-Vorthok tactics when he received an unexpected visitor. Ambassador Vex, the Altarian diplomat who had questioned human motives during the war, stood in the doorway of the training facility. "I wanted to apologize," Vex said quietly. "I didn't understand your people. When I first met them..." Pete paused his lecture to the security trainees. "What do you understand now? That you fight not because you want to win, but because you cannot bear to lose. There is a difference." Pete nodded. "God, the difference is what we're willing to sacrifice. We'll give up everything except each other." Meanwhile, Jake Morrison found himself in a meeting he had never expected to attend. The full Galactic Council had assembled to hear his report on the war. Representatives from dozens of species sat in a grand chamber that had been built to impress visitors with the power and authority of galactic civilization. "Captain Morrison," the council chairman began, "your actions have saved billions of lives and preserved the freedom of countless worlds. The council wishes to offer your people full membership and all the benefits that entails." Jake listened to the formal offer. Permanent bases in the core worlds, access to advanced technology, trade agreements, and defense treaties. Everything a small colony could want. What about the refugees? Jake asked. The chairman looked confused. What about them? The people we rescued, the survivors from destroyed worlds. What happens to them? They will be relocated to appropriate facilities and eventually returned to rebuilt worlds or integrated into existing colonies. Jake felt something cold settle in his stomach. Separated from each other, processed like cargo, it's standard. Procedure for displaced populations. Each species has specific needs and requirements. No, Jake said firmly. That's not acceptable. The chamber fell silent. Nobody had ever refused a council offer before, especially not someone from a minor. Colony captain, the chairman said carefully, perhaps you don't understand the magnitude of what we're offering. I understand perfectly, Jake replied. You're offering to make us part of the system that abandoned us 15 years ago. The same system that ran away when the Vorthok came while we stayed and fought. He stood up, looking around the chamber. At the representatives of species that had built this grand civilization, we didn't fight this war to earn your approval, Jake continued. We fought it because it was right. And we're not going to hand over the people we saved to be processed by bureaucrats who never risked anything. Lisa Rodriguez spoke up from her seat beside Jake. Sir, the council is offering to rebuild our entire fleet with their latest technology. And what would we do with ships we didn't build ourselves? Jake asked. Ships we don't understand, with systems we can't repair. We'd become dependent on people who have already proven they can't be trusted in a crisis. Danny Kim added his voice to the discussion. The medical facilities they're offering are impressive, but they want to separate the refugees based on species compatibility. That means breaking up families that have formed during the war. The council representatives began to understand that they were dealing with people who had fundamentally different values than the established galactic powers. What do you want? The chairman asked finally. Jake thought about the question for a long moment. What did they want? They had never wanted to be heroes or saviors. They just wanted to survive and take care of each other. They want to go home. Jake said, all of us, humans and refugees together. We want to rebuild what was lost and create something better. But your world lacks the infrastructure to support such a large population, a council member protested. Then we'll build it, Lisa said simply. We've been building things from nothing for 15 years. We're good at it. The chairman looked frustrated. You're turning down membership in the Galactic Council, access to advanced technology, and permanent security guarantees. Why? Jake smiled for the first time since entering the chamber. Because we've learned something during this war. The most advanced technology in the galaxy couldn't stop the Vorthok. The greatest military minds couldn't develop effective tactics. But people who cared about each other could do both. You fought brilliantly, the chairman admitted. But you can't isolate yourselves forever. We're not isolating ourselves, Jake replied. We're just choosing our own path. If you need us again, you know where to find us. Next time, don't wait until you're desperate to ask for help. The human delegation left the council chamber. The same way they had arrived, together and on their own terms. The offer of membership remained open, but they had more important things to do. Over the following weeks, the human fleet prepared for the journey home. Refugees who chose to stay with them were welcome. Those who wanted to return to their own. People were given safe passage and supplies, but something remarkable happened. Most of the refugees chose to stay. They had found something among the humans that they had never experienced in their own civilizations. They had found acceptance, family, and the knowledge that they would never be abandoned. Lisa Rodriguez stood on the observation deck of the new Defiant, watching the stars as they prepared to jump back to Kepler 442b. The ship was one of several vessels they had built from salvaged parts and refugee contributions. It wasn't as advanced as Council technology, but it was theirs. Ready for the jump home? She reported to Jake.